Good morning again. Hope you enjoy your breakfast. Thank you for being here. This is a very important topic, we think. First of all, I want to apologize and I want to give you Bob Billington's regrets for not being here. Ironically, 2 weeks before the October floods, we ran an event called Footsteps in History that went from Worcester to Providence. It covered the valley. We had artistic, cultural, and historical sites open to the public, and we applied for a grant that have been awarded to us. So he's right now in DC receiving the grant for the valley. So his apologies for not being here. Why we're here today is to find or to understand the conditions and to come up with the questions why we went through what we did in October. We had an incredibly amount of rain coming down and made the river flood. There were things that we saw we didn't understand, and we thought that bringing key stakeholders to the table to analyze those conditions and to ask the questions was going to be beneficial to come up with a valley-wide system. We saw in October that each community was trying to do the best they could, but there was no coordination among them. And we are in a valley, we're in a system, and we thought we could have responded to it as such. The flood, we believe, is just a trigger of how we need to respond to a disaster, how to mitigate a disaster. This is one little part, and that's what have impacted us. So we think this could help us in other disaster mitigation that might come up in the future. The other thing we believe is that we need to react, or we need to act to this kind of situation from the local perspective. And that's one of the reasons why the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce and the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council have initiated, or were very interested in approaching this. We believe that each stakeholder, each community needs to be responsible for their own. And we are here to talk about it and see what the rest of the community thinks. So that's something I think it's very, very important. Having said that, I would really like to introduce and thank John Gregory, a partner in this initiative that has been working with us since the October floods. John?
Thank you, Veronica. I could just about say ditto. Veronica did a good job in the overview, but from the Chamber of Commerce's perspective, and before I forget, I do want to mention that we're running, along with the Small Business Administration and Code Red, and Lori Adamo was here, some disaster planning seminars for businesses. So if you talk to any businesses over the next couple of days, have them call the Chamber, and we'll tell you about, because there's like 3 or 4 different locations over the next 5 or 6 weeks, right, Lori, with the different chambers. So, You know, our purpose for getting involved in this, quite frankly, was we don't know anything from the, we don't know enough anyway from the business community's perspective, and saying to ourselves, okay, how do we perhaps even become one of your partners in doing what you do? What can we do to outreach to the business community when in fact we have some type of disaster? There are a lot of different ways that I know that you all outreach to people, but we're saying, gee, is there a role that we could play to help you be even more effective? And it's also to learn. The dialogue that you'll be having today, I mean, Veronica will tell you that her and Bob and I, since October, have learned about more acronyms than we probably cared to. When we start looking at all the different resources that are available and the different plans that are available. But most of all, I do want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's very, very tough sometimes to get a 4-hour block where you can come and focus on one individual issue. So we do appreciate you coming out, and we look forward to working with you along with the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council. And I saw Rich Davis from the Pawtucket Foundation here, another one of our partners. Larry Gold from the Heritage Corridor Commission, I know, is in the room. Unfortunately, our friends from the Blackstone Valley Chamber today had a couple of major events, and they've got some conflicts and weren't able to participate. But it's all about how can we work together. It's part of, actually, quite frankly, a bigger picture that's going to be revealed maybe a little bit further down the road on Massachusetts and Rhode Island and the river working together on a lot of different initiatives. So, again, thank you. I think you're going to find, as Veronica will tell you when she introduces Larry, that we have an outstanding facilitator. And open your minds and your mouths and your ears, and I think we'll all get something out of this. Thank you. Veronica?
Thank you, John. What I would like to do right now is if everybody could very quickly introduce themselves, tell us who you are and which organization you're representing, so that we know who's in the room. Larry? Thank you very much. I think it's very impressive to see all these stakeholders here. It's very good because a community is formed by public, private, nonprofit, and business people. And it's very important to have everybody collaborate and coordinate in good times and in bad times. And I think we have a lot of work to do together. So thank you again for being here. Now I would like to introduce Larry Quick. He's going to facilitate this workshop and try to get us go through and brainstorm and come up with all the conditions that we need to take into account and how we can approach them. Larry?
Thanks, Veronica. Can everyone hear me? Now, I've got to tell you, I feel like Madonna right now. So, with this little thing on here, but I can assure you I'm not. I'd like to welcome everyone here today and to say that, just to congratulate the work of the Council, Tourism Council, and also the great work that John's put in. And everyone in the room is sort of in the background, obviously worked on disaster mitigation in the Blackstone Valley. I think it's timely, this might sound strange, but I think it's timely that this particular event has taken place. I think we all understand the heightened understanding, if you like, a heightened awareness of disaster mitigation, particularly in the United States of America. When you go back over the last 5 years and just pick out those disasters that meant a lot to you personally. You know, I know that sitting in Australia, you'll notice that's where my accent comes from, but I'm a fully fledged resident of Rhode Island these days. But I can remember sitting at my desk, sitting in front of television, because it was a different time zone, and seeing this little ticker come up on the bottom of the screen that something had happened at the World Trade Center. And I think we all remember where we were at that particular time. But here I was in Melbourne, Australia, watching this little ticker and not really understanding what it was until I changed the channel. And there it was at 11 o'clock at night in Australian time, seeing something that I would never ever have believed happened. And I want to tell you that that particular time was not just a time that America felt the angst that it did in that particular disaster. It went through Australia and through every particular country I know. I know my internet lit up with people talking about it. So I think we're very, very fresh with those ideas. We're also very, very fresh with the most recent disaster that we've experienced in Katrina. And once again, I can tell you that particular disaster, I was coming and going from Australia a lot in 2005 to the US. It was the same in Australia, the impact it had. And I think if we also talk about the tsunami that we experienced through Southeast Asia at least, that made its way as a ripple down to Australia, no great disaster there, but that affected the whole of Southeast Asia there. So I want to bring us into the room, not necessarily with the fact of problem on our mind when we're talking about disaster. But maybe what we're talking about here is the idea of opportunity. That not only does disaster mitigation, which is not necessarily going to prevent the disaster from happening, but it's actually being able to make the best of these potential things that can occur. So in thinking about disaster mitigation, we're not thinking about doing nothing necessarily and responding whatever happens. What we're doing is say, what can we do to really reduce the severity of these discontinuities that come up? Now, life is a continuous group of changes that occur, as we all know. They occur throughout, whether we're 10, 15, or 35 or 50. Life is a matter of change as we go through. What we want to be able to understand more is not the continuous change, the continuity, it's the discontinuities that occur. And that's what we're endeavouring to mitigate against. So today's exercise is about looking at the bigger picture in its fullest form and then coming down to narrow it down to those things that we think are important. I'd also say that New Commons is a think, link and do tank. So it's a subtle difference to what a think tank is. What we tend to do is to look at the 21st century based capability that it takes to run cities, regions, towns and villages. We also work on the corporate side as well, but today what I want us to do is look at the thinking, or the latest thinking if you like, on what it is to be a region, what it is to be a village, what it is to be a town or a city, particularly in the Blackstone Valley, in terms of disaster mitigation. So that thinking part is really important. I think as Veronica pointed out, this is like brainstorm, but it's more of a controlled brainstorm. So what we're going to do is do some thinking. The next thing we want to do is do some linking, as in networking together, to make sure that what we aren't operating as, when we look at this idea of disaster mitigation, as sole operators. We have to understand that our independence is only allowed through our interdependence. Understanding that any place operates as a system, like a system of systems. So understanding that linking is very, very important. So our interdependencies actually showed up very, very strongly when we saw what happened in the flooding recently. The last is doing. And I think this is going to be very, very important for you guys to work out. What is it you want to do about this? There'll be lots of questions. I think today is not about coming up with all the answers. If more, in the time of 4 hours we've got, we're going to come out of here with more questions. But I think the critical outcome that we need to achieve is to start to answer what are we going to do about it. Now, if we can put a framework down that says this is what we're going to do to answer this bevy of questions that we have, that will provide us with what we've talked about here in terms of flood mitigation, at least 21st century flood mitigation. So I just wanted to start with that preamble before we start to look at the objectives of today and the program. First of all, critical in any strategy that you create is to create this idea of a shared understanding of the conditions. Make sure we're all on the same page as to what's happened or what could happen. Like the question's going to be, what happened in October 2006? As you'll hear me talk about, from the moment the first drop of rain fell onto that piece of land, into the river or wherever it was, what happened from that point on? What were the conditions that were prevailing at the time? We need to all understand those and align on those before we can move forward. Then to also identify where we need more information on those conditions. And you have to excuse me today, the great work that the weather, sorry if I get the right name wrong, Weather Service put in to a 35 to 40 minute presentation that we couldn't fit in today on whole, because we're going to get a range of speakers to give a quick view of their particular understanding. But we know that there's more to find out, such as what the Weather Service has got to offer us. And I think that's something we need to definitely program for later. We know there's more to find out inside those conditions, but what we want to do today is identify what are the key conditions that we need to understand. And then create this idea of a first draft inventory of the capabilities that we need to mitigate flood damage. And maybe extending that. As Veronica said, this is a trigger for us to look at a greater variety of potential flood mitigation, disaster mitigation. And looking at it from a Blackstone Valley perspective, not necessarily from one particular place's perspective. And lastly, to establish an outline of the next steps, like where do we go from here? So today is an active part of a program, if you like, that's a starting point. And you'll notice from your agenda that you guys get to do most of the work. What we'll be doing after we've started this little brief presentation is to start getting stuck into answering the question of conditions, creating a shared understanding of conditions with a variety of presenters giving us very, very specific pointed views, which, as I say, you will have more questions and most probably answers from those views. And then we go into a group discussion to ask some questions. First question, what was missing during the flood? What was possible in October 2005? What could we have done about it? What else was there? Where is that capability, or does it need building? So that we're inside that set of conditions we come up with, we're going to look at what are the capabilities that we could have to mitigate those conditions. So if, say, for instance, we found that there wasn't, one of the conditions was a situation with dams, what's the capability we need to make sure that dam situation doesn't occur again? So those are the sorts of questions we're going to get into, and I'll talk more about that later. We're going to specifically want to know what more information we want on the conditions. Now, what we don't want to do in disaster mitigation is to work on assumptions. Making assumptions that it's all going to be okay isn't going to work. So we need to be very clear on what the conditions were, so we can all align on those conditions and make have a very good context for decision making. Where are we going to identify and create the desired disaster management capability? Or how are we going to do that? And I think one of the key questions